Has anyone ever made you want to throw your pager out the window, tell MCI to cut the phone pole, break your lease so you could move? Well, if you relate to the first two things in those lyrics, you might be a Xennial. Hi, I'm Katie.
And I'm Danny.
And you're listening to Generation in Between, a Xennial podcast. And today we're talking about the once mighty pager, or beeper if you prefer. But before we get into that, let's talk a little more about this podcast and the term Xennial, which I have to admit, Danny, before I asked Google to pronounce that for me, which is a totally Xennial thing to do, by the way, I always said Xennial, and hopefully some of the listeners also do that. Hopefully I'm not the only person on the planet that did that, but can you tell us a little more about what that even means?
I can. So your mispronunciation is actually on point because a Xennial is technically the generation that is sandwiched in between Gen X and millennial. Okay. So your pronunciation error makes complete sense, Katie. So Gen X is 1965 to 1980. Millennial is 1981 to 1986. So a Xennial is 1977 to 1983. These are all birth years, PS, by the way. So we were born a little too late to kind of identify with Gen X, but we were born a little too early to identify with those millennials. I've seen it described as we had a analog childhood with a digital adulthood.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so perfect.
I know, right?
Yeah, so putting X in there sort of makes sense since we have our Gen X friends right before us and our millennial friends right after us. I like calling myself an Xennial or a Xennial more than saying an elder millennial, which I have said before.
Feels very wrong.
It doesn't feel right. So, so let's tell our listeners just a little bit more of like where we sit in that Xennial span, starting with you and your birth year.
All right. So I was born in November of 1980. So I guess I'm kind of right in the middle of that Xennial time frame there. 1980. Here's some key points. Pac-Man was released in the arcades. Remember those? It was the highest earning arcade game of all times.
Wow.
Which I already knew that because my husband is a retro video game collector. So Iraq invades Iran, initiated the Iraq-Iran war. John Lennon was shot. And Mount St. Helens erupts, killing approximately 57 people.
Wow. Kind of a historic year for a lot of different reasons. You hit on a lot of things there. Well, I was born in May of 1982, and that is also the same year that the compact disc, or the CD, was introduced. Steven Spielberg released E.T., which became the highest grossing film of the decade. Good year for releases because Michael Jackson's album Thriller became the best-selling album of all time.
Nice.
And also, apparently, the Falklands War started, but I don't actually know what that is.
Where was that?
In the Falklands? Is that a place? I don't know. Someone help.
Makes you sound smart, though.
Exactly. And neither of us was born in 1981, but when I was researching these points, I just thought I would touch on that, too, because that was kind of a big year. Princess Diana and Charles met. Space Shuttle Columbia launched successfully, and also the first reported case of AIDS happened in the U.S., which is definitely something Xennials grow up knowing about, and something we're definitely going to talk about on this podcast on a different episode. So that's just a little bit more about us and our time frame. And today specifically, we are going to talk about potentially one of the most Xennial devices of all time, and I'm not talking about the smartphone. I am taking it way, way back to the pager or the beeper. Danny, do you ever have a pager?
Oh, yes, I did. And I was trying to remember if I called it a pager or a beeper. So my mom had one. She was a nurse. We'll talk about that later, I think, in the history of stuff. And she called hers a beeper, but I'm pretty sure I called mine a pager. So I had mine, I think, my freshman year of college, which was 1998. It was blue. It was see-through. And I had to pay for it at a gas station, only in cash.
Oh, God.
I went to college in a rural area in North Louisiana. Yeah, and so that was my little pager. I only had it, I think, for like a year or so. I think I paid $19 a month for it.
Yeah.
So yes, I did. Did you have one?
Yes, similar. I think I got mine in about 1998 as well. I was in high school. And it was blue and clear too, I think.
Get out.
I'm still looking. I have an iconic picture of me in overalls, and I had it clipped in my little front pocket.
OMG, so 90s.
So I'm going to try to find that to put it on our socials. But I had it, and yeah, I probably had it at least a year, maybe 2. I was in college before I got my first cell phone, right, which came then. But same, my dad had a pager for years. He wasn't in healthcare, but he was in construction. And our family was relatively familiar with it and sort of used to it. I think my parents, maybe same as yours, agreed to it because they could get hold of me. However, like with the pager,
I don't think my mom knew I had one.
Oh, I love it.
Because I paid for it in cash, right?
At the gas station. She didn't have to know.
I don't think she ever knew.
I love it. Well, I know by today's standards, a beeper, pager seems sort of pointless, right? Because you couldn't make calls from it. You still needed a physical phone to kind of follow up on the pages you were receiving. But back then, the pre-cell phone days, they actually were the go-to way to get hold of someone who wasn't near a landline. And as we'll talk about in today's episode, people got to the point where you didn't necessarily have to call someone back, right? With different shorthands and codes. Pre-texting, all these abbreviations we use, but you could just page someone with a code and they would know what that meant.
Yeah.
Whether it was a friend or a parent or whatever that meant.
It was not land breaking. Was it? What? Groundbreaking. Land breaking.
We broke the land with the pager.
It was groundbreaking. Texting, right? Texting on a pager. Remember when you were in grade school and you would try and put stupid words on a calculator?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what you did on the pager, right? You made the numbers.
It was the step up. It was the step up. Yeah. And we'll get into that too. Like later versions of the pager actually had keyboards. I never had one with a keyboard. That. It was very much toward the end and then was overshadowed by being able to text from a cell phone very quickly.
So it was like a pager BlackBerry?
Yeah, similar.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that. But let's get into the history of the pager.
Yes.
So for those who don't know, maybe some of our younger listeners, pagers, also known as beepers, they're these small pocket-sized devices that were one-way communication. And this might explain why your mom called it a beeper. The earliest pagers were called beepers because of the distinctive sound they made when receiving a message.
What was that, Katie?
It was a beep. It went beep, beep, beep.
So
I think, right? Is that how your mom sounded?
Do you remember, though, you eventually could change the sound? Like when we had our see-through ones, you could change it. My mom's wasn't. It was a big, black, boring one for emergency personnel. So it was like beep, beep. Oh, that was probably real fun for sound there.
But it was an emergency sound. I know I could turn mine to vibrate too.
Oh,
and it would just go zzz, in my little overall pocket or on the side of my boot.
Did you feel it through all that denim? I don't know.
Exactly. No, not really. I probably needed it to beep at me. And so they became really popular in the 1980s and were widely used through the 1990s. And the basic idea, someone would send you a numeric message, usually a phone number, and it would display on the small screen. There was no voice options, at least those early ones. There was no texting, just simple numeric messages. Let me see here. So they did have limited character displays, at least back then, usually only 16 to 20 characters, not words, but characters. So you figure an average phone number has 7 characters alone. And so then people came up with these creative message abbreviations. I know even with my dad, we used some abbreviations.
So what were
things
some
like
that you
that.
did?
If he was at work or out on a construction site, we would just send star 29, and that meant call home.
Okay.
I know a lot of people use beep me 911.
Yeah, that's what I always did, even if it wasn't an emergency.
Yeah.
I just want you to call me right now. So
yes.
It's very important I tell you the gossip that I have.
Yeah, exactly. But the actual technology of pagers dates all the way back, and I was surprised to hear this, to 1928. And that was when a Detroit police officer, who was also an electronics buff, devised the first successful one-way radio link between police headquarters and cruisers. So kind of similar to what we think of now when squad cars have the receivers that get the messages from headquarters. That was the first time something like that came across. So, but they had to use transmissions that were already there. So they actually used a radio station frequency. So this is really interesting to me. I would have actually loved this. So, people can sit by their CB radios now and hear, but this was the station that played music and did news because it was regulated that it had to be entertainment on some level. And these things would just be interrupted with crimes in progress. But it still was an entertainment station.
So who did the music? They had like a private DJ?
They must have. And their call letters were KOP, which is really cute, right?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So,
I mean, not very creative. But okay.
Not very creative.
But all right.
And so crimes in progress could be transmitted from the station to police cars, which were Model Ts, by the way. Model T police cars at this time. So it worked through the radio waves, like I just said. So essentially, this signal would take priority over the radio frequency and whatever was broadcasting to get that across. So the police had to listen to it, but other people could listen to it, if that makes any sense.
Does that seem like it's good for safety? I don't know.
I don't know. I can't tell, right?
You can still do that now.
People can hear.
Tap in.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's really interesting. I think I would probably always listen to that station, though, because I would just love to hear the hot goss going on with the with the police officers, but like listening to my Ella Fitzgerald, and then all of a sudden there's a murder in progress. But I feel like you'd have to learn all the codes for the crimes so you knew what was even happening. Oh, someone stole a loaf of bread. Meh. Body found in the river. Ooh,
because that was
going
the 30s,
on here.
right? The 30s?
Yeah, it was like late 20s going into the 30s.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it is. So then after that, things sort of stalled out. That was sort of the technology. It was adopted by other police stations. And then a name that would become synonymous with the industry, the pager industry, Motorola, entered the market in 1959. And in fact, Motorola is the company that coined the term pager. So that was their term.
Did you have a Motorola?
I did have a Motorola. Yeah, I did.
I think we had the same exact model.
I think we might have. I wish I still had it. Maybe my parents have it somewhere.
Motorola. All right. Coming in hot with some game changers here.
Yes, they did. And their first successful consumer pager was their Page Boy, which is what it was called, which is really cute, I think. Introduced in 1964. You could not store messages. It had no display. Okay. But it was portable. It notified the wearer by tone what action they should take.
I was going to say, if it had no display, yeah. Then...
So I guess you could just maybe have a preset thing. So, for example, if it was in the hospital, maybe a certain tone meant go here, go there. So it's
like Morse code?
Maybe. I feel like it was a sound, though. So maybe like a certain beat meant something and a certain other beat meant something else. I think that would be a little confusing. But that's how they started.
Interesting. Okay.
And because of that, they were initially popular with doctors and emergency personnel.
Makes sense.
You could reach someone quickly, no matter where they were. But they also started to become a symbol of status and connectivity for other professionals, business executives, journalists, and even teenagers. Oh. When the teens get it, it's going to be bad news. But of course, one of the key advantages was the reliability. And this was interesting when I looked this up. A lot of hospital groups and some other industries still use pagers because the infrastructure in place for those is still stronger than cellular network.
Yeah.
So you can be somewhere that you can't get a cell signal, but a pager still works.
And the batteries last forever. Because it's
forever.
Like normal batteries. You don't recharge them and all the things.
Yeah. So, and that too, sometimes a single charge or single batteries could last weeks.
Oh, yeah.
But then it was in the 1980s that regular consumers really started to pick up on pager use, what it could mean, to make their lives a little easier. So back then, the devices themselves cost about $60 to purchase, and I looked up the conversion on that, and it's $120 by today's standards, which is $120, but you think how much we pay for cell phones and stuff?
Way more than that. Yep.
Way more. And monthly fees were often $10 or less. It sounds like you maybe paid about $20.
I think I was paying for the pager with the
monthly fee.
Probably paying like 6,000% interest at
right?
behind the glass window. And
that adds up.
If any of my friends are listening to this and remember the name of that gas station that we paid for our pagers, please
tell us.
Send me a text because I need to know. I can't remember.
You can see it. You can see handing the $20 bill through the window, but you can't think of the name. So in 1986, Time magazine called pagers the most popular electronic device since the Sony Walkman.
Oh, Walkman. We're going to have to do an
since then.
episode on that.
Oh, yes, we are.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of already talked about this, but if you think about it, it was, as you said, land-breaking, groundbreaking.
Yes,
It broke something because it really was the first time you didn't have to be, quote unquote, connected to something to get hold of someone. And this idea that these types of signals could travel wirelessly was just sort of born out of the pager, really.
Yeah.
That was the most consumer way. So in the height of pager use by 1994, 61 million pagers were in use worldwide, which seems like a lot. At the time, there were 5.6 billion people on Earth. Wow. And most of the people, the 61 million people with those pagers, were using Motorola devices. But I'm going to put that in perspective for a second because it does sound like a lot. There are 6.92 billion people on Earth now, up from 5.6 billion in 1994.
Okay.
And 85.88% of those 6.92 billion now owns a smartphone.
Whoa.
So, hold on, I'm going to blow your mind here. So, 3.3 million more people own smartphones than actually existed in 1994.
Now, that is some land-breaking math.
Brain-breaking.
Brain-breaking.
So, 61 million pagers is a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot.
But, yeah.
But not like...
But 6.92 billion people. So that's like another thing, right? Like we talk about all this technology change and all these, you know, pop culture things and society things that have changed just in our lifetimes. But that's a pretty huge thing too.
Right?
Like how many more people live on this earth now that has multiplied in our lifetime. So 1995 then, the year after the 61 million pager statistic, was the year that Motorola released the first two-way pager, the Motorola Tango, which shifted the use case for pagers. So it was kind of a bridge device between the one-way communication of a pager and then what would end up being cell phones and texting.
And do you remember this? I do not remember this.
I don't either. I think
this
I went straight
for like rich non-college
from
people.
a pager to like a cell phone.
Yeah,
there was
same.
no like in between for me.
And then I remember Nokia was the big thing.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yes.
So Motorola was the pager company in your research you found? Mm-hmm. They were like the one.
There are others now. Motorola basically doesn't make anything like that anymore.
Yeah.
But there is one called SPOK, and they specialize in industry pagers, hospitals, and they're a pretty big company. But Motorola was really the
big cheese.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So pagers, of course, any sort of technology like this we're going to find throughout our culture, right? Throughout pop culture.
Yep.
And the 1990s especially saw pagers becoming cultural icons, especially in the world of hip-hop. Rappers and artists frequently referenced their pagers in songs and music videos, and they were symbols of success and affluence. They were a fashion statement. Obviously, me and my overalls. We already covered this.
And blue see-through.
Blue see-through. I think there's some glitter in there.
Oh, man.
And so suddenly returning a phone call after a page was no longer necessary. That was something someone said kind of like sort of the pager stood on its own. Like sometimes just to have it, the necessity of it was there, but there was also this whole other aspect of just simply having it.
Yeah, because like not every... I was sitting here as we're talking trying to remember how many of my friends had one. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a lot, which also is kind of dumb because like if not a lot of your friends have them, then how are you trying to
to communicate? Yeah.
But we can talk about the problems with pagers later.
Oh, yes.
Right?
That's coming. Yes.
It's coming. I know.
And so I tracked down a few of the more popular songs of the 80s and 90s with some pager references. If you listen to the top of the episode, the throw my pager out the window.
That was the OG Destiny's Child, y'all.
Yes. Beyonce.
That was when it was
Beyonce and Four Ladies. Yes.
Uh-huh.
And that was, of course, from Destiny's Child classic Bugaboo. And that was actually late in the pager game. That was 1999.
Oh, yeah.
And then, just a quick apology to all of the artists who delivered these lines much cooler than I'm about to.
Right.
But there was a big one. It was like 1989, Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Oh, please tell me you're about to rap.
Lesser known.
Please tell me you're about to.
I can read these. I can try.
Oh man,
I
disappointing.
don't want to disrespect Sir Mix-a-Lot.
True.
More than
We don't
I
need
will
to have
be
cultural
already.
appropriation on
No,
Pager
no
episode.
cultural appreciation. Yes, appropriation. No,
But I'm sure your rap skills are great.
they
for
are
a middle-aged white lady.
offline. Offline, I'd be happy to listeners. I can send you individual videos if you'd like them for your birthday or whatever.
That could be a whole business.
That could
Middle-aged
be.
white ladies rapping cervix.
Right. And
No,
can
that'd
just
be
make
horrible.
fun of us.
Don't do
That'd
that.
be really bad. That's actually a really bad idea.
That's a really horrible idea. Don't do that.
I feel like we're gonna have some great ideas on this podcast and some bad ones. We'll put that in the bad
I
pile.
probably will have all the bad ones. Katie will have all the good ones.
Yeah, right. Well, I am about to read these lyrics from Sir Mix-a-Lot's Beepers. So Sir Mix-a-Lot, of course, Baby Got Back, most famous. But you may have forgotten this long-forgotten hit called Beepers.
I
And
don't
some of the
remember
lyrics, Pagers, call them what you want. Some brothers were fake ones, still trying to flaunt. Walking in a party, looking like Joker. Big ol' 6-inch garage door opener.
Yes.
I
Could you
love
just not
it.
see that in your brain?
Yeah.
Yes.
He's
That's how my
describing
mom's pager was. It was ginormous. And it
Yeah.
looked like a garage door opener
Yes.
from the late 80s.
And
I don't
then-
remember that song. But
We'll have to play it
That's
for
fantastic.
copyright reasons. We can't play it on here, but I'll play it for you. And listeners, look it up. It's Sir Mix-a-Lot, Beepers. And then later in the song, he says, if you ain't got that PIN number, dummy, you can't call me. And there's a music video that goes with it, highly recommend, that features a couple of women with their pagers, like calling people back from a telephone booth.
oh, iconic. How
It's
do I
good.
not know this?
It's good.
I know what I'm doing afterwards.
Yeah, you're going to have to watch it. And then there was another one, Hit My Line by Keon featuring H-Town.
I
Remember
have no idea
H-Town?
who any of those people are.
I remember H-Town. I don't remember
H-Town?
Keon. Yeah, what else did they do? I think they did that My Boo song.
Oh.
At night, I think of you. Wait, that's not My Boo, is it?
No.
But they
I don't
did
know.
that one. I want to be your lady, baby. That was H-Town.
On, give me a call, boo.
See?
Okay.
That is My Boo, isn't it?
oh.
I don't know. Anyway,
know.
that's their song.
That's fine.
And I don't think we'll get hit with copyright because we really didn't sound like them. But in this song, the lyrics are, hey, you got me feeling like old school. Got me feeling like old school. So can we do it like old school? So can we do it? Yeah. Just hit me on my pager for it. 69. Just hit my line.
There it is.
Yeah. So what's funny is eventually, wasn't it? What was it? Calling people back was star 69.
Okay, so we were trying to talk about this a little before we started recording, right? I cannot remember any codes. I mean, 69 is like obvious. That's the endless number combination for all the things. that
for all the
involve numbers.
things. Yes, all
right?
the things.
So I remember 911. Like I said, I use that for everything because I had very urgent call requests.
You're right.
I don't remember anything else. I remember. Well, 411 was "I love you," right? No,
Maybe.
no, that's information.
That's information,
Wrong.
but it might have been star. He's saying
143.
143.
Oh, Katie's husband just informed us.
Okay.
One
Our
four.
producer.
Oh yeah. Okay.
143. That makes sense because
yeah,
that's
duh.
the letters on the 143's I love you. My husband also pointed out there was one that meant boobies or looked like boobies.
It's well, yeah, because you can do it on a calculator too, right?
Yeah.
Spell out
Well,
boobs.
I don't know anything about that. I don't know what's wrong with you all, but I'm just kidding.
Whatever, Katie.
I wasn't texting.
That's how we
movies.
entertain ourselves in math class
Just
and middle
69
school.
for me. Thank you.
They probably still do it. I swear,
Yeah.
they probably still do it on those graphing calculators.
They probably do. But in addition to these lovely lyrics, there were also artists that wore them like Tupac, Notorious B.I.G., Ice Cube, Method Man. They had very visible pagers.
So that was probably like a whole cultural thing that, as like I said, two white ladies, we can't really shine much perspective on. We'll just go
Correct.
ahead and make that disclaimer here,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, and it was, I think, too, like the fashion of it and the affluence of it, depending
Yeah, definitely.
what your circle was.
Definitely a status symbol for sure.
Yeah, and kind of going into what you're saying about the cultural aspect, I really had to revisit. I had this thought about pagers that I hadn't thought about for a while, but I remember growing up, and even when I had one, there was this whole narrative around pagers and drug dealers.
Yes.
Do you remember this? This was
Yes.
like an actual thing, right?
I do remember that. Yeah. Even when it was like totally normal for people to have, well, normal is relative.
Yeah.
It was more widespread for people to have them. Yeah, they were saw that little drug dealer.
Yeah,
So
and it was just...
Are you going to tell us more about that?
I decided, you know what? I want to look into this a little bit now that like I'm older and wiser and kind of sort of coming to terms with narratives I was fed either as a kid or even an adult or even now. So I kind of dug back into this. And I found some interesting things. So 1, yes, drug dealers had pagers. 2, so did everyone else.
Right.
So like, I just want to say that right off the bat. You know, I found some quotes in some magazines and things where police officers are like, every drug dealer we arrest has a pager.
Oh, of course they
But
said
it was like in 1994 or whatever. It'd be like saying every drug dealer we arrest now has a cell phone.
Has a cell phone. Yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously the numbers I gave, there's more cell phones, but it's that sort of vibe. Okay, but so does everyone else.
Because that goes into a whole other conversation about what narrative they were pushing as who is committing what crimes, et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole thing, right?
Whole other thing, right?
Yep.
So I did find one article that basically said pagers were more discreet than cell phones, obviously, one-way messaging capabilities. So they became tools for the illegal drug trade. They, you know, allowed dealers to maintain a degree of anonymity, and it was also hard for law enforcement to intercept their messages, though I'd argue it still is now.
Although, yeah, I guess that would be, how do you track a pager? Right. It seems easier to track a cell phone these days.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, that's true for everyone.
Right.
That's any crime anyone's committing.
For sure.
If they're sending secret codes through a pager to the person they hired to kill their spouse, it's hard for police to intercept that too. So I think just there's always going to be illegal things that happen with all technology, of course. It's just sort of funny to look at it now and the amount of Pandora's box that cell phones, smartphones, internet has really opened since this time.
Right.
And that this was the narrative and the worry. And then you kind of compare it to now. And it's like, that was really nothing, you know? So, of course, the prevalence of pagers in this drug dealer narrative was sort of perpetuated by the media.
Imagine that.
Yes, exactly. Movies, TV shows, music frequently depicted pagers as essential accessories for characters involved in criminal activities.
So that's a whole nother thing too, right? Because who is deciding that narrative in the media?
Exactly.
Bunch of white men, just saying.
Yeah, especially back then, right? It's really interesting, again, to just sort of deconstruct it and be like, all of the things that we accept without consciously accepting it. Does that make sense? We just like, oh yeah, that's, you know, criminals have pagers.
That's all that.
And they're all people of color. And that was just kind of what we saw.
That was what we, I mean, it was intentional planning by who was in charge, right?
Yeah.
And so,
but not intentionally accepted, I feel like, by us. So it does.
It's that, what is that word that I'm looking for? It's like that unconscious bias that you don't even know you have.
Right. Absolutely. And I can see how, you know, just the appearance of pagers, particularly with this bigger drug dealer narrative, could really perpetuate that. So what's interesting is, especially now that I have kids in school and they have all these, depending on the school, all these cell phone policies, no cell phones, cell phones only at this time, cell phones not even allowed on campus, like whatever it may be. I read an article on a site called Tedium, and it was called Bad News Beepers. It was written in 2021, so recent.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was like, that is a very 90s title, but...
Isn't it? Right?
All right.
And it kind of looked at this drug dealer effect, how it shaped school rules on pagers, which I thought was really interesting. I don't remember my school rules on it, but I feel like I had to have it hidden during school. Like I couldn't have it where it could be seen.
You can't call anybody back at school. Well, we had payphones. So I guess you could.
I think, at least in my school, it's more a distraction kind of thing. Because if someone did page you, it could beep or vibrate or whatever. So they kind of just went it out. But now that I think about it, were they associating it with gang activity? I just remember I had to not have it super obvious if I was at school. But I don't know why. But so this article, Bad News Beepers by Ernie Smith. Ernie argues that the narrative around pagers and drug dealers was overhyped, which I think we can agree on at this point, to the point that a really useful technology at the time, particularly for young people, was not allowed to exist in school spaces. And in his article, which is more recent, he references Time magazine from 1986, and he references the Los Angeles Deputy District Attorney Curtis Hazel in 1986, who said, beepers are the single most common tool of the drug trade. Again, I feel like that would be saying drug dealers communicate on cell phones. So then a turning point in this trend came in the summer of 1988 after the Washington Post wrote about the phenomenon specifically tying drug dealers with beepers to schools. And this appears to have kicked off this national trend in media coverage based solely on the growing number of mentions of the subject after that story's release. And a different piece by a journalist named Jonathan Moses notes the use of beepers, which confer status among young people, has been so prevalent that Prince George's County and Baltimore school systems prohibit students from wearing them at school. So that would have been like going into the 90s. And in that story by him, of course, he has a stat from federal narcotics agents suggesting 90% of drug dealers use pagers in the fields and that they were introduced to them through the Colombian drug trade. So it's interesting. Not only are they using these, they're coming from other countries and they're infiltrating America.
And you know, this was also, like we mentioned this before we started recording too. This was during the quote unquote war on drugs. That honestly wasn't really even real. So you can research on your own on that. We may talk about that some other time. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that this narrative was pushed, considering the other narratives that were being pushed regarding drugs and
all at the same time.
People of color and low income populations, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not, but
they all kind of go together.
It all goes together
It does.
on the narrative that was being fed.
Yeah. And as I was reading these, I said stories like this prompted a bit of a pager panic. TM. I'm trademarking that. Pager panic.
So many panics during the 80s.
And I was like, satanic panic? Nope. Drug panic? Nope. Sort of.
That wasn't really a
pager
war.
panic.
Yeah.
So this is sort of crazy. I saw a lot of examples like this, but this pager panic caused the city of St. Paul, Minnesota, their phone company there, went as far as replacing tone dial payphones, you know, where you push the buttons, with rotary payphones to prevent drug dealers from dialing pagers.
Use a rotary phone?
I think you could dial the pager number, but then when you input the code, whatever you wanted to tell them.
That is so extensive. Lord.
That is really extensive.
Oh, okay.
It also means no one else could use it for that reason. Like a kid who maybe is trying to contact their parent, or a parent who's trying to contact their kid.
Oh my gosh.
So the reputation of pagers as a tool of the illegal trade carried through to entertainment, which we already talked about. A narcotics officer specifically blamed Miami Vice and other TV shows for making pagers popular with criminals.
Okay.
And this officer was quoted as saying, "They see the crooks on TV using the stuff, so they think it's a good idea." TV made them do it. Yeah, TV panic. No, that one doesn't have as much of a ring.
Oh, well,
Right.
and who was that? Who was TV casting as criminals too? Like that's something to think about.
Exactly. Right. These crooks that he's talking about.
Like, what are we trying to say? Oh, there's so many things. Oh, come on.
I know. I'm like, I just want to revisit pagers. And then I started really looking into some of this a little more. And I was like, this is really messed up.
It's never as simple as we think,
and
everyone.
I sort of forgot that this was what I was hearing. And I didn't question it at the time. But I guess thank goodness for age and wisdom, as we Xennials have. Of course, like all this hype and pager panic overshadowed the fact that the pagers were also being used legitimately by regular people who had no criminal intent. And all this bad news about beepers caught the attention of one company in particular, our friends at Motorola, who did not appreciate that their money, their cash cow, was being associated with criminal activity everywhere they looked. So they released some ads of their own. I would highly recommend looking these up, just like Motorola pager ads, late 90s. There was one I watched where it's a mom and a daughter paging through their codes to convey messages to each other. There's another one where there's a teenage son convincing his dad to let him have a pager because the dad was worried, that maybe the son wanted it for illegal reasons. And the dad said he could, but he had to shave his facial hair. And so, I guess they both won because dad got the shorter facial hair. Huge deal, apparently, to get your teenage son to do that. And the son got the pager. So all that to say, the stereotype of pagers and drug dealers never really faded, from like what we're discussing now. But the popularity of pagers did, which brings us right to...
Womp, womp.
Exactly. All good technology must come to an end.
It does.
I know, it's sad. Like the compact disc, which came out the same year I was born and is now obsolete.
Oh, girl, I still have mine.
But I'm not. Just those.
I still use mine.
The clubs. We'll have to talk about that too. The CD clubs.
Oh, BMI, yes.
Oh, yes, we have to. But obviously, several factors contributed to the decline of pagers. Some of them are really obvious. The rise of mobile phones, the ability to send text messages directly from your phone made them less necessary. And then the limited functionality of them, too, became pretty obvious when regular cell phones came along, and certainly when the smartphone was introduced in 2007. 2021 article on Spock.com, which was that company that I said makes them now for places. Why pagers still matter, according to them.
I mean, do they?
Well, Spock thinks they do.
I don't.
They report that 80% of hospitals still rely on pagers for critical communication. They're easier to be HIPAA compliant.
That's fascinating. Oh.
Due to their limitations. And as we mentioned earlier, those surviving pager networks are more reliable than cell towers. So I guess Spock isn't making the argument for consumer use, but more industry use. Depending on the case.
Yeah.
So I get it. So that is the little revisit
history
story and deconstructing some narrative around pagers.
Oh, there's so much there, I think we could still go into.
I know, all these little spin-offs.
And let's just put another disclaimer. Like, we're just talking from our point of view here, right? So, again, we're two middle-aged white ladies.
Yeah.
Not like you don't hear from enough of those.
Right.
But, that's what we are. Okay, so something we should talk about. Let's talk about the problems with pagers, right?
Yes.
Okay, we didn't hit on that. We hit on it a little.
A little bit, yeah.
So here was the biggest issue as a pager user. When you'd be at a party or something and somebody would page you and you'd be like, well, now I have to find a phone.
Yes.
Or if you were out somewhere and the payphone was broken, because we had to have coins in our pocket to actually put into a phone to use it.
Yes.
Right?
And you couldn't call collect for a pager.
Although, did you do the collect call trick? Do you remember this?
No.
Okay, so this is what I used to do. This was pre-pager. This is this is kind of like a little off beaten path story, but it is kind of connected. For instance, before I drove a car, and back in the 80s, 90s, when your parents would just drop you off all the kind of godforsaken places and hope that you survive, right?
Exactly.
So when I was ready to be picked up from the movies, right, I didn't have a quarter, which drove my mom crazy because she was always like, carry a quarter so you can call.
Yeah.
What we would do if we forgot our quarter is we would pick up the phone, call collect, and by the way, kids, this is what collect means.
Oh, yes. Got to back up a step.
If you didn't have a quarter to put into the phone receptacle to pay for your phone call, you could dial a collect operator and have the person on the other end accept your charges. Okay? Mm-hmm. So it was an automated thing back in the late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. And you would say... there would be a little blank, so it would be like, "Hi, you are receiving a collect call from," and you would put your name in there. It would be like a little recording would beep. So what we would do instead of saying our name, because we wouldn't want our parents to have to accept the charges, because it also cost way more than a quarter.
It was a lot
if you accepted a collect call.
I just remember thinking a collect call was if you were dying or kidnapped.
So your parents were pissed and don't call me collect, unless you were dying. So what we would do was when it would do the recording for us to say our name, we would talk really fast and say, "Mom, I'm ready for you to come get me from the movies. Bye." And so she'd get the collect call.
You got a collect call from Mom, I'm ready. Come get me from the movies.
And sometimes it wouldn't go all the way because it was only a couple seconds. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to do it a couple times.
Right, to get it right.
So I remember doing that with a pager. If I did not have a quarter to call back, and I don't know what I would say, but yeah, so that was a problem with pagers. You had to have a landline.
Yep.
Or a quarter.
And I think finding the quarter was the harder part.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and also just like you mentioned with the false 911s, and if you weren't by a landline, not so much for me because I was the kid, but my parents, for example, and you would get that and they're panicking and then they're like, "Hey, where's the crackers?" Or whatever.
Yeah, so my mom had one. She was an ER nurse for many years. So she had a pager for work. We were not allowed to ever call my mother at work or page her at work unless for real there was death.
Yeah.
That's it. And I remember I have an older sister who's 7 years older than me, and she was mean as tar when we were kids. And I remember one time paging my mom at work, 911, to call me back. So she freaked out, and it was just to tell on my sister. Like, we got in so... Not only did I get in trouble, she got in trouble.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tara.
Sorry, Tara. You were mean, and you got in trouble.
I love you now, though.
I mean, I can kind of relate. Sort of, I just get sometimes random texts from my kids like that. But the great thing about the smartphone and the text is they can extrapolate. Instead of like, you need to call me immediately. It's like,
and they can send
being
pictures
mean to me, and look what she stole, or look what she broke, and then you're like, I can kind of assess this in real time and just deal with this later, right?
Send me a picture of the cut.
Right, exactly.
How bad is it bleeding?
Is there blood?
And Katie has 5 kids, y'all. So like, you know, there's a lot of texting.
There is, yes, and it's funny because I kind of give different directions now. You know, I'm a performer as well, so sometimes I'll be at like a rehearsal at night, for example. So my instructions to my kids now will be like, go to dad unless dad's incapacitated, or he is out with another kid and something happens, or like whatever. There's all these rules, like he's the front line. I don't want to look at my phone and read this long thing about how you don't like that so and so wore your shirt, you know, like
right. 911.
That's not it. But we would have paged that 911,
totally.
and yeah, that was definitely a problem. And even though they had a long battery life, I guess maybe my pager did have one of those little battery life things, so I knew when it was going to run out of battery.
I don't think mine
can't remember.
did. I mean, it was AAA's, right?
Yeah, AAA's.
AAA batteries.
2 or 3? 2 maybe?
I think it was 2.
Because they were small.
Because we didn't give size. Like, so how big was your pager?
I'm guessing you had a similar one. So maybe like a little bigger than a matchbox.
It's a little bit smaller than, or like credit card size, or smaller?
Probably a little bit taller than a credit card.
I'm trying to remember how big mine was.
Yeah.
My mom's was definitely like garage door opener size. And those, by the way, those were not cool to wear around. No.
Well, I didn't even talk about, I know you said you're not a Grey's Anatomy fan.
No, but you should probably talk about that.
Yeah, so any Grey's fans out there, they've now switched to mostly cell phones because they're in like their 25th season or something. But in the early seasons, the interns and the doctors all had pagers, and they had the Sparkle pager.
Ooh.
Which you wanted to get if you were an intern because it meant that one would page with all the good surgeries. And they were
Sparkle
surgical.
pager?
The Sparkle pager. And boy, was it sparkly.
Ooh, I love that.
So I just always think about like, oh, the Sparkle pager. And then I thought my pager was kind of sparkly that I had. So I was always like, oh, I have a Sparkle pager. Or I did,
I don't think mine was sparkly. I think it was just see-through.
Okay.
Which is so dumb. Like, why? I don't know.
That's so
why
great.
do we need to see the wires in the pager?
Why?
I don't know.
I feel like why is a really good question. And we're definitely going to be saying that a lot as we go through this, and hopefully answering why when we can,
or leaving you with more whys. Who knows?
Exactly. Like just in our conversation today, I'm like, okay, I have to write down 4 or 5 other episode ideas now that we have to delve into.
Know.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for listening to Generation in Between, a Xennial or Xennial podcast.
Or Xennial. Yes.
For our Xennial friends out there. If you liked what you heard, please share us with your friends of all generations. We are all generation friendly. And leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find us on patreon.com, become a monthly supporter, and you'll have access to some other perks. All of that information is linked in our show notes. So until next time, just beep us 911 if you need us.
Hit me on the hip.
Hit her on the hip, y'all. And bye, guys.
Bye.